Overall, the world of Hyrule is a lovely place, filled with a lot of beautiful and peaceful villages as well as cities. However, out in the dark corners of the land, there are dense forests filled to the brim with creatures that we know little to nothing about. Beings that sometimes want to harm you and other times will actually help you. And there's one that is the most mysterious of all. A prankster that can harness incredible power and use it in terrible ways. And I call these legendary beasts the Tormentors of the Woods. Now, our story starts in an incredibly well-known game, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Because here we see a location that's only known as the Lost Woods, a mysterious, forested region of Hyrule that's typically a maze-like forest that's extremely hard to navigate through. In the end, most kids and adults who enter these seemingly cursed woods never return home, being consumed by the darkness found within. So, as you can imagine, throughout the years, a lot of horror stories were created around the mystical Lost Woods, and no one dared to enter them. Only a specific set of creatures are able to live there, with the Kokiri being the most advanced and civilized, which isn't really the case with all the others. And out of all the stories surrounding this place, there's one that's the most scary for sure. Because it is said that if people wander in the forest for too long, they can turn into monsters such as Stelphos or Deku Scrubs. But there's one other creature that's found there which isn't seen as much as all the others, the Skull Kids. They are a race of small, mischievous beings residing in the forest. And while most people become Stelphos when they are lost in these woods, only a select group of them become Skull Kids. Because Navi says in Ocarina of Time that when children get lost in the woods, they may become Skull Kids. Which actually makes sense, because when Link encounters them as a kid, they tend to be extremely friendly to him. However, later on when he becomes an adult, they are hostile towards him, and that's because they fear adults and will attack them on sight. And as adult Link, you can even take him on in battle. He dodges and disappears when you shoot him with a bow, and can actually take damage when being attacked by a sword. When you deal enough damage, the creature finally goes down, after which we see something horrifying. His lifeless body falls to the ground and he is immediately engulfed by a massive amount of blue flames like a Poe and Stelphos, and then drops an insane amount of rupees. 500 in total. Now it could be that he got his hands on such an insane amount of money by collecting any that he finds in the woods, but we can't be certain about that. However, the more unsettling thing we learn from this is that the Skull Kids are most likely undead enemies, which means that those children that got lost actually died, and after becoming cursed by the mysterious woods, they were doomed to walk around in them forever. This could also explain why he can vanish like a ghost, but we will get back to a lot of this later on. In the end, they run around the area of the Lost Woods, keeping themselves busy by playing all kinds of instruments, mostly flutes, as well as messing with people that they come across. So they are some sort of forest children, once being a Hylian child, and then in time they changed into something else, being cursed to roam the woods forever, never really being able to leave it, and they will always remain a child. And while this might sound like quite a harmless creature, they can do some terrible things as soon as they come into contact with power. And throughout the years, we've come across certain Skull Kids that were able to get their hands on powerful artifacts which they used to terrorize the woods and even entire worlds. The most well-known example of this is an event known as Moon's Day, where the world of Termina was almost destroyed. Here, prior to the events of Majora's Mask, one of these creatures steals an item that has the exact same name as the game from a character known as a Happy Mask Salesman. Compelled by the evil within the mask, he uses its power to pull down the moon and direct it towards the land, seeking to destroy the world after 3 days' time. So clearly the Skull Kid race can easily be manipulated, and if you combine this with their childlike behavior, it can end in catastrophe. And after Link saves the day, we find out that this is most likely the same Skull Kid Link befriended by playing Saria's song in Ocarina of Time. So even if they seem friendly, these creatures have the potential for causing havoc and even destruction of civilizations. And probably because of this, they aren't really allowed to join normal society, even if they find their way out of the woods. They are just too dangerous and would immediately cause problems with the adults. But luckily enough, they usually don't attack any settlements, only travelers. But it doesn't end there, because many years later, Link would encounter another Skull Kid that had some interesting powers and possibly connections to older games. Because in Twilight Princess, Link also has to make his way through the forests to reach the sacred grove found deep within. Here he also makes his way through a maze and gets help from an interesting character, a Skull Kid with a very weird flute. He leads Link through the Lost Woods portion of the Sacred Grove until he's in the room next to the resting place of the Master Sword. Along the way, the Skull Kid plays a game of hide and seek with Link, as he must find him several times before he leads him to his destination. He even uses his mysterious flute to summon puppets that attack Link, but we have no idea where these even come from. The only thing we know about them is that they are supposedly the defenders of the Sacred Grove. So with that being the case, Skull Kid is most likely the main defender of this area. We don't know how he got this job, but it seems like his role in the games has gotten a lot bigger. Somehow. Because this abandoned and cursed being defends the mighty Master Sword. However, in this game we saw more interesting things. Link ends up attacking him and strikes him numerous times with his sword, which doesn't seem to faze him. This is really weird because in Ocarina of Time he died after a couple of strikes, burning up completely, which isn't seen here. So apparently this one Skull Kid has certainly gone beyond what a normal one of his kind can do. But there's more, because the song that the Skull Kid plays on his trumpet is a rather gloomy and melancholy rendition of Seria's song from Ocarina of Time. And while there's no confirmed relation between the Skull Kid from Twilight Princess and the one from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, the fact that it knows Seria's song, which Link taught to the Skull Kid in Ocarina of Time, suggests that there is a connection of some sort. It could be that we have seen the exact same Skull Kid in all of the Zelda games, and over time he has become more powerful. But that's not all. He has also become a lot older. Clearly they can become hundreds of years old, which makes sense since they are most likely undead. So in the end, we know they are created when a kid loses his way in the Lost Woods, eventually dies, and comes back as a Skull Kid. Now we don't know how many there are, since the one we see in the games has been seen in a lot of them. So it could very well be that they are incredibly rare. Even more rare and legendary than the Sea Devils known as the Big Octos from the Wind Waker, that we covered in our last video. However, now that we know their origins, story, legends, and powers in-game, we only have one thing left to do. What inspired Nintendo to make these strange creatures in the first place? Well, let's find out. First of all, the idea of an enchanted or cursed forest has been seen in mythology and folklore for many years, being filled with monsters, witches, and more. The forest can feature as a place of threatening danger or one of refuge, or even a chance at adventure that changes the characters permanently. And of course, children also played a role in these stories sometimes, which we have seen many times. For example, in Hansel and Gretel. Usually in those stories, children lost in the forest are abandoned, stolen, raised by wild animals, and for some the wilderness is their natural element and home. And such tales of babies being left behind in the woods can be found in myths, legends, and sacred texts of cultures all around the globe. So that most likely inspired Nintendo to create the Lost Woods in their games. And quite early on, this idea was seen in Zelda titles. However, I'm not really certain where the idea of Skull Kid completely came from. Sure, it's related to the whole abandoned child and enchanted forest stuff, but I couldn't find anything specific that fits. So the fact that these children meet their end in the Lost Woods and then become some sort of undead cursed creature is most likely Nintendo's idea. Although in a lot of stories on enchanted or cursed forests, you can see that people or certain beings did change thanks to its influence. So this time around they didn't directly take it from a well-known folklore story like they did with the Big Octos. Instead, they took some inspiration from them as well as fantasy stories and shaped them into something they liked. So much in fact that this location and its many creatures were seen in a lot of Legend of Zelda games. And now we finally know the story of the Skull Kids. A legendary creature that went from being an innocent child to a cursed being with the same character that's doomed to wander the woods forever. Also, if any of you come across certain folklore stories or mythical legends that seem to have inspired the Skull Kids from The Legend of Zelda, be sure to let me know in the comments section. I can't always have all the answers after all, or find all the pieces of evidence, but for now we will have to wait and see what Nintendo actually does with these strange creatures. Because we haven't seen them in quite a while after all. But maybe Breath of the Wild 2 will change all of that. Only time will tell.